I'm Winnie Zukowski, Director of Practice Services here at Henry Schein Dental. Really happy to have you on this webinar. Thank you for taking the time to join us on the next Dental Business Institute webinar. We appreciate your time and interest. And as practices are in varying stages of closure to reopening to fully open again, we continue to want to help provide avenues to help practices financially. Insurance is one of those avenues, and I am pleased to welcome Scott Hironaka from Unitas Dental. Unitas has been a long time, over 6 years actually, partner with Henry Schein Dental and Henry Schein One, helping practices improve low PPO insurance reimbursements through PPO negotiations and optimization. Unitas Dental is one of the largest PPO management companies in the United States, actively representing hundreds of dental practices in over 44 states. Scott Hironaka is Vice President of Unitas Dental and currently oversees the team responsible for active insurance and business contract negotiations for the Unitas clients. He's been doing this for over 15 years in both the corporate negotiations and the public and private sectors, so can certainly offer us some fantastic perspectives on this topic. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Scott Hironaka.
Thank you, Winnie. I am very honored to get this opportunity to talk to providers that are, I'm sure, feeling somewhat stressed and concerned about the past few months and the things that have gone on, as we all have. I think as any business owner, I'm sure one of the ongoing things that is on everybody's minds are how they're going to recover from this downtime, this inability to be doing work. You know, I want to express my gratitude to all the providers and everybody that's been willing to sacrifice and obviously look out for the health and well-being of us all, and their willingness to look out for their staffs and follow the guidelines and have their practices closed for some period of time. But there's no question that is a great sacrifice and a huge concern about the revenue that's been foregone during this period of time. And so we thought it would be very relevant. As you mentioned, we've represent more than 600 separate dental practices across the country. And as we are talking with lots of our clients on a daily basis, we certainly understand their concerns about, you know, how are we going to recoup this lost revenue. And so we think it's extremely, at any time, it's important to be really looking and understanding how and why a dental practice would participate in a PPO network. But I think it's even more relevant today and more important that providers really understand, again, the relationship that they have with a preferred provider organization and what the goals of that relationship are and should be. And I think as we're starting to see the states reopen and as providers are starting to come back to work, I think the good news we can share, as again, we have a lot of clients across the country and we're starting to see the practices we represent in some of the states that are opening, that it does not appear that there's been a significant change in the demand for dental treatment. In fact, many practices as they're getting back to being open, are finding that they're more busy than they've ever been. But the real issue is that there's been a fundamental change in the cost component of the dental procedures that are being offered. I think the obvious one is the addition of personal protective equipment. The PPE side is certainly going to change cost, but I think a more significant change in the cost equation for most providers is going to be that their capacity has been and will be diminished moving forward. Dentistry's been great. It's been an outstanding industry in adjusting and using technology to be more and more efficient. And as a result of that, really the cost of dental treatment for the past 10 years has been fairly stable. And so patients have really been able to enjoy a lot of dentistry for really not an increasing cost. But unfortunately, I think some of the new normal that we're going to have to adjust to is that it's going to diminish some of that efficiency. And just from a sense of changing waiting rooms and just how closely appointments can be scheduled is going to have an impact. And so I think it's really important that all providers are starting to focus now on the revenue per patient and not just the number of patients that they treat. And this was always really an important thing, and really the focus that Unitas Dental did for our clients is to help them really understand and develop a strategy to really maximize that revenue per patient. And so I'm kind of excited to share a few things today with our viewers to help them understand, again, some of the changes that are going to impact their practice, but more importantly, present some strategies on ways to work with the PPO companies to account for this adjustment and hopefully recoup some of the lost revenue that unfortunately had been sacrificed over this period of time. The majority of practices have obviously experienced a very, very significant reduction in revenue the past few months. Now, again, the good thing for most dentists is that demand was just kind of tabled and it has now kind of sat. But one of the issues is that even when patients return, a dentist can only see so many and treat so many patients per month. So without drastic changes to the capacity of their practice, trying to recoup what's been lost is going to be, very, very, very difficult. And so again, really focusing on understanding that the margin per patient is going to be really important, and doing a little focusing on what is affecting and impacting that margin is going to be important. And so increasing the per patient revenue is certainly going to be the key to sustained success, over the next few years. And when we think about that, I think it's, for most practices, you really have to think about your relationship with the PPOs, being that such a large portion of many practices' patients are utilizing these plans and these programs to access dental treatment. And the question that every dentist probably should ask themselves is, why do they participate in the first place? And it sounds kind of funny to say that, like being the number of years that really a large portion of the dental industry has participated in these plans. But, when I talk to a lot of dentists across the country, they kind of think, well, I participate because I have to. And that is one way to look at it, but it really isn't the right way to think of the reasons why most practices engage in participating in network with a PPO. And the real reason is there is a substantial value proposition that's being offered through participation in these organizations. And the main value proposition is that most patients really require a third-party validation to feel comfortable about treatment acceptance, because this can be a stressful purchase for most patients. Retail science has kind of taught us over the years that we have a tendency to feel much more comfortable when there's been a third party sort of validating the value of whatever it is that we're purchasing. And that really is the value proposition of PPO participation. And I think a lot of doctors don't really understand that. And so when you think of it, it's really interesting to think of what's the reason that practices are participating in the program. And it's really so that their patients can feel comfortable about accepting all the treatment that's being presented. And so when most practices are asked, why have they chosen to be in network with a specific PPO, their gut answer is going to be to acquire patients, to help me get patients. And in reality, the PPO companies will tell you that is not the value that they're attempting to offer. The value that they're providing is really helping their patients feel comfortable, again, accepting treatment, because in essence, they're trusting the PPO company to, one, have vetted the actual fees for these procedures, and then acted on their behalf to get them a discount. And by getting lower prices, that allows the patient to feel more comfortable about accepting treatment, and therefore they do. But it's important for the practice to really understand the range that value proposition exists. And the problem that most practices find is that they've entered into agreements with the PPO companies where the procedure compensation is perhaps outside the value proposition. And what I mean by that is, you can see by kind of the diagram we've got up here that there's a market rate for dentistry, and then most PPO plans are offering some sort of reduced price for those procedures. The issue becomes, how big of a percentage, how large of a discount does a practice have to offer to make that patient feel comfortable that, you know, making the decision to accept treatment. And what we're showing here is, what we found is, obviously outside of a 10%, you know, less than a 10% discount, most patients are not going to feel like that's significant enough to accept treatment. And that is why they've gone out and enrolled in a PPO plan. And one of the issues, and you can see the bar on there that is referring to in-house plans, a lot of practices will offer their own in-house dental plan, but they'll set it at a 10% discount rate and find that most patients aren't purchasing the plan because they don't perceive that the value is really there. That being said, if we look at on the far side, this PPO number 1, many dentists, because they haven't reviewed their own costs and don't have a good handle on really where their break-even points are and what the real value proposition is, they may enter into agreements with various companies where they're giving far too great a discount to be in that range of where they're sort of overpaying for that treatment acceptance, where they're giving too much of a discount. And so what we really want to try to do is get every practice to really focus on what we would call their participation portfolio and understand all the companies that they've gone into network with, and make sure that the compensation arrangements with those companies squarely puts, you know, their patients inside the value proposition, where they're very comfortable to understand they are getting, you know, a very substantial discount, and yet it's not so great that it endangers the practice's viability and potential profitability. You might notice over on the in-house plan bar that, again, we recommend to all of our clients when we review their in-house plan to provide them that they're going to set them inside that perceived value range for a patient. Outside of that, they're going to find it very, very difficult for, you know, patients, for them to sell those plans to their patients. And again, because they've got to compete to some degree with the PPO market. And that's why there are great tools for patients to evaluate various dental plans and compare them. And so because that's out there and those tools are available, again, it's important that practices really understand, you know, the market. And so how do they do that? Well, the first step is going to be for sure for them to evaluate their own office fees. And we do that with all of our clients, but a great way to do that is to work in conjunction with Henry Schein, with an FSC, to get a practice analysis. But it's important for the practices to really understand where they fit in the general market. We find that many practices don't understand that relationship that they have with the PPOs, that the PPOs are requiring the practice to set the market the market rate for dentistry. And so with their individual office fees, they need to make sure that those fees account for the fact that a large percentage of their patients are going to need and will want some sort of discount off of those fees. And that's why they're turning to the PPO plans and enrollment in PPO plans. And so there needs to be accommodations for that. So again, first step is really to understand and evaluate your own fees. You know, the kind of the process we take our clients through and that we're encouraging the entire industry and all providers to do is to really understand a breakdown of their production, understand what are the procedures that they're doing, the nature of their patient makeup, the types of patients that they're seeing, and what the needs of those patients are. You know, and that will obviously vary via particularly age demographics. Practices that see a large number of elderly are going to see a different mix of family-oriented practices. They're seeing a large mix of younger patients. But understanding your production breakdown and really isolating kind of your top procedure codes is, again, part of the very first steps. And again, understanding your practice well enough that then you can go and negotiate with the PPO companies to get a more suitable compensation rate that's going to get you in that ideal zone of where the compensation is meeting the value proposition offered by participation. And so after you've got a handle of, you know, on your own practice, what are the procedures you're doing? You know, we suggest doing a quick cost analysis on your procedures and understanding on a procedure basis what the cost to deliver that procedure is. And we think that's important because remember, you're entering into contracts with these PPO companies on a procedure basis. So they're literally setting a compensation rate for a specific procedure. And it's important that the practice really understand, well, what's my cost to deliver that procedure? And without knowing that, it's really hard to understand, you know, what fair compensation is going to be for providing that. But once you've done that, it's important if you are participating, and many practices over the years have slowly kind of I'm always amazed that when we bring on new clients that they are very unaware of all the different avenues in which they are participating with the various companies. And that's because it's become very, very complicated for sure. But it's important to determine and really assess how are you seeing patients and how are you participating with the various payers? And again, why that's become difficult is because there are a lot of different avenues. It used to be you either in network or out of network. And if you were in network, it was because you were direct contracted and that you had set up a direct contract directly with one of the companies. And you could identify those patients because they had an enrollment card, and that card had a company logo on it, whether it be, you know, Cigna or MetLife or Delta Dental, and that was pretty straightforward. But the emergence of umbrella networks and leasing arrangements between the various companies has really made it much, much more complicated for practices to understand, again, how they're actually seeing patients and how that patient is going to be paying for their dental treatment. And so the next real step is probably to map your participation. And again, I understand that this can be very, very complicated and very time consuming for your staff. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, you know, we probably have the large number of clients that we do, because this is it can be very, very difficult to do. But it's super important for you to understand, am I direct contracted with these companies, or do I see patients through that are enrolled in these plans because the companies have a shared doctor panel through a leasing agreement? Do I see these patients as a result of being in a network program? You know, the example here on the screen, Connection Dental, is an umbrella network. It really doesn't have individual patients on their own, but they represent a large number of insurers and payers that access doctors through the connection dental contracts that they have put into place. And so again, why this is important is as you do an overview of your participation, it's going to provide sort of a roadmap to, one, make submitting claims and understanding how to dispute claims much, much easier. But more important to understand, again, where are my patients coming from and what compensation rates am I receiving for treating those patients? And as we see schedules change or compensation change, doctors are able to then understand why that's happened. What we do and suggest every practice do is to rank fee schedules and really understand. When I was showing the earlier slide where we have all these different PPO companies, kind of your participation, portfolio or profile. Obviously, some are going to be compensated at a higher rate than others. And so you really want to understand that balance. Any doctor that's looking to do substantial marketing, in our opinion, before any doctor would be marketing direct to patients, they should really understand, well, what plans are compensating me at a fair rate or are the most desirable compensation rates. And those are probably the patients that I should try to market to the most and try to schedule accordingly so that I can balance out my overall revenue streams. That we know that we run into a lot of dentists that can be very frustrated when they've run into a plan that has not only not increased compensation, but actually has decreased compensation from a prior year. And they have such a large percentage of their patients that they're seeing through those plans, they really feel somewhat helpless, like they have no choice but to just accept the decrease because they can't go out of network. And so we really discourage that kind of thinking of being so dependent on one single provider organization that you feel like you don't have choices or decisions. Now, the good news is that because of these umbrella networks and these leasing provisions, there are ways for you to make sort of in-network adjustments and to go back and forth and negotiate on a per procedure basis. And it's important for every participant in these networks to really understand that they have an obligation to their peers to make sure that the fees are adequately set. That's not the job of the PPO to make sure that practice owners are getting paid what they need to. That they really rely on the providers to set the compensation rates. They're going to certainly negotiate back and forth, but their goal is to provide as large a discount to their enrollees as they can. And so you need to expect that and need to actively participate on an ongoing basis in fee negotiation for the benefit of not just your own practice, but for all the entire industry. And it's important to kind of understand that on a individual basis you can really see the difference on just a one negotiation. If the net increase is just even 10%, you multiply that over hundreds and hundreds of procedures in a given year, it has a substantial impact on your ability to grow your practice and provide high quality treatment to your patients. And that's really what your patients are asking you to do. I know that it can be difficult for dentists, and they can be very sensitive to raising fees, but they need to understand, as we've gone through with this healthcare crisis that we've just experienced, that really our patients are depending on their healthcare professionals to make sure that that they have the adequate equipment, that their facilities are in a position to give great treatment. And of course, as costs continue to increase, it's incumbent on the practice owner to understand that they have to continue to increase, their fees to accommodate for those increased costs. And, I think when you really look at it, while it might seem like small amounts per procedure, when you really add them all up and you look at the sheer volume of procedures you're going to provide to your patients over the course of a year, small increases are really have a dramatic effect on the overall viability of your practice. Now, again, one of the biggest struggles that we find practices having is that when it comes to actually negotiating the compensation rates, they feel like they have no power. They feel like, well, I've talked to, a specific PPO and they feel like they have more than enough providers, and they just don't seem to be that interested in addressing what my needs are. And that's where really understanding these lease networks is incredibly important. And doing what we call optimizing your participation is really the key to giving yourself some bargaining and negotiating power. And I realize that many providers may not quite understand what we're talking about here. And so it's important to understand that, again, many PPOs have entered into lease agreements where they actually are sharing their doctors. And they're not necessarily required to notify doctors when they've decided to lease that doctor to another PPO company. Now, the benefit to the practice is now you're able to see additional patients that may be enrolled in another plan through your existing contract. The negative is going to be that if that contract doesn't compensate you at a suitable rate, you've now added even more patients that, again, would normally be paying your office fee, which are now entitled to have a discounted PPO rate because of this lease agreement. However, if you have a good understanding of how everybody is working together, then there is the opportunity, using umbrella networks, third-party administration agreements, and just direct lease agreements between individual companies, you have the ability to select those companies that are offering a competitive compensation rate and shift patients through those companies. So the example is, if you have two groups of patients that are both are enrolled in two separate plans, one plan is not compensating at a rate that you're comfortable with, but the other plan is, and those two plans are sharing or leasing the panel, then you're much better off to see all patients through the one company that is compensating at a suitable rate. Now, that being said, we'd encourage every practice, and this is one of the things we do on behalf of our clients, is just have direct negotiations with that company. And as you inform them that you kind of understand that they're partnered and that you'd like the fees to match, one, it's way less complicated for your staff. And more importantly, it's less confusing to your patient, because your patients want to get good treatment plans and they want to know that the cost that you're explaining to them for their dental treatment is going to be what is going to be the charge at the end of the treatment. And when there's all this confusion from the panel leasing, we're finding that a lot of doctors are experiencing that their treatment plans from a cost perspective are off, because they thought they were going to see a patient under one plan, and as it turns out, because of a leasing arrangement or an umbrella network, the compensation is for the procedures is different. And so really, that's part of, again, what we kind of call tracking your optimization, or understanding which PPOs you can access or be in network with through network participation in an umbrella plan, versus which companies you would need to direct contract with, versus which PPOs your practice can participate with through a leasing agreement between to different PPO, companies. The other thing to be really careful about is, or to understand and be careful with, is that leasing and shared network arrangements continue to change very frequently. And so you have to keep up with what's happening in the marketplace. And that's really incumbent on your staff and you as a practice owner to read all of the correspondence you get from these companies, really make sure you understand the correspondence. And if you don't, reach out to someone that can help you understand the correspondence, because changes in these networks can have very dramatic effects on the overall revenue stream you're experiencing from these patients. And in many cases, they can present opportunities for you to go in and negotiate and attempt to get a more suitable compensation arrangement. Overwhelmingly, we say be careful. These are complicated arrangements. They are contracts you're signing. We never want any practice to not be in compliance with the legal agreements they're signing with these companies. We want you to understand that these companies generally, while there might be some pricing you don't like, do their very best to be very compliant and to follow the guidelines and the messaging that they give the patients. And so it's important that as a partner in these arrangements that you're compliant and that you don't want to be doing anything that would put you out of compliance with your agreements with the insurance companies. But it does represent a real opportunity for practices to get competitive fees that they can feel comfortable with participation. And again, while I realize that many dental providers don't have the most positive feelings about having to participate in these programs, I think it's important to remind yourself of the original value proposition I presented, at the beginning of this little presentation, to say they do serve, from the patient perspective and even from the provider perspective, an opportunity to validate the need for treatment and get patients comfortable with the acceptance of treatment and understand that accepting treatment is good for their own well-being, and that the industry kind of self-regulates and makes sure that the costs that are being presented for this treatment are fair and equitable to the patient, and they should be really comfortable, again, accepting treatment, and even if it's a little more than they were expecting or that they'd saved for, that they can feel comfortable moving forward. And so there are a lot of interest in in-house plans as well, because as you start to understand the value proposition that is offered by the PPOs, many practices and practice owners think to themselves, hey, it might be really advantageous for me to offer my own plan, being that it seems like obviously patients are adopting the PPO plans at a fairly steady rate. And so we're finding that practices that used to be fee-for-service only are becoming rare, more and more rare. And so an in-house discount plan, or your own plan, really provides an opportunity to attract new patients, retain current patients, increase treatment plan acceptance, and provide your patients an alternative to traditional employer-offered dental insurance. And given some of the situations that have occurred in the last few months, we might find that a lot of patients have lost dental coverage or even healthcare coverage. And so providing this opportunity, this option to patients might be something that practices should really consider. I jump you back to that again, that value proposition that's being offered, that if the discounts offered in your in-house plan are not commensurate with what the general public views as being a real value, it will be difficult for you to sell those plans and have your patients feel comfortable and good about enrolling and participating in them. And so we see hundreds and hundreds of practices that are administering their own plan and are finding that it's very difficult to sell those plans. And in many cases, it's because, again, the value proposition being offered by the plan isn't suitable to make it attractive. I think that it's also important to understand that these plans have a high level of compliance. And it's still, they're somewhat kind of in the gray area. There are states like Washington where the requirements on a provider to offer a plan are extremely high. And so it's important to have your in-house plan, if you have one, reviewed by someone competent in the legal profession or in the insurance profession to make sure it is compliant, that you're very cautious in using any products that help you administer that plan, that you understand where the liability for the plan lies, and that also very important that your plan is in compliance with the other agreements that you may have signed or entered into with other PPO plans, and that your plan is not kind of subverting or pulling you out of compliance with your arrangements and contracts with the PPO plans you're in network with. And so it's important that we really have a good understanding in totality of what your offerings are to the patient and the different ways that patients have to basically accept treatment and to access your practice. And we recognize that the landscape has gotten much more complicated, much more competitive, but in the same vein, I think that there are some amazing opportunities for practices to really provide the dental treatment that is needed out there. There's a just overwhelming demand for dental treatment. The issue becomes, how do patients access that treatment and affordably pay for it, while at the same time allowing the practice to be profitable and successful. One of the things that for sure we want to offer anybody that's been part of this little seminar is we'd be happy to visit or talk to any practice that has questions. But I think, Winnie, maybe you've got some questions here that we can address that are kind of the common questions that we see from a lot of practices.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. Really great information. I think it's definitely easy to see how complex this can get very quickly, and the many steps that are involved and considerations that you have to have if you're going to move forward and do this yourself. So let's start. As you mentioned, there are a few questions that we are continue to get from customers here moving forward. So I want to make sure we take some time to address those here. So let's start with those practices who are not open yet. If my practice is not fully open, I said, if I can only just do emergency services right now, should I wait to work on my insurance situation, or should I go ahead and move forward?
Well, there's never a bad time to start looking at and really reviewing what your relationships are with these companies, and actually the shutdown is probably a good time to really assess. I think that has happened. I think most business owners during this time have reevaluated their business, really tried to understand how these events are going to impact their business and their staff, and what kind of adjustments they need to make. And so this has actually been a really good time to really assess where you are as a practice and to sort of get the ball rolling. This process takes a lot of time. There's no question. It takes a lot of time to evaluate your own practice, but the back and forth, I can tell you, as someone does it all day long professionally, the back and forth with the PPO companies takes a lot of time, like any good negotiation should. And so I think, again, this bit of downtime that some practices are experiencing, great time to get started, great time to evaluate and use many of the tools that are provided, great time to maybe talk to a Henry Schein to see about getting a practice analysis and understanding what their practice is doing. These are, good opportunities to, do some housekeeping, so to speak, with your business.
Yeah, so really never a bad time to take a look at this for sure.
Never a bad time. Right now, probably a good time, could
Yeah.
be a really good time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, we talked about how complex this is. And I know, early on we talked about the PPO, the portfolio analysis and the office fee analysis. Those really resonated with me. But if I were looking at this and wanted to get started somewhere, what are a couple of quick and easy things that a practice can do to get started with the process that, you've just spent this whole time walking through?
Well, again, not to kind of repeat, understanding your own fees and where you fit in the marketplace, necessary first step. We're finding in the negotiation a lot of confusion even on the part of practices that are looking to, I think on their books reduce write-offs and insurance adjustments, are trying to have their office fees match their PPO agreed fees, which sort of completely defeats the purpose of participating. Even the PPO companies do not want you to do that. They are insisting, and by agreement and by contract are asking for you to submit your actual office fee, the market rate fee for your service, not your contracted fee with their specific company. And so first and foremost, every practice should do the quick analysis of their own fees and understand where they're placed in the market. And obviously that can be difficult. Restraints on talking with other practices and colluding with other practices on fees keeps most practices from being able to talk to all of their peers about what their dental fees are. And we're not suggesting that, but utilizing a third party, like Henry Schein, that does have great data and great information. I mean, in our opinion, some of the best fee data that's out there is the fee data that Henry Schein provides in their practice analysis. And so that's a great opportunity for doctors to kind of see where they fit in the marketplace, in their geographic area compared to their peers. So first and foremost, they want to do that. Another quick thing that they can do is evaluate how they're participating. Again, always shocked at the number of clients that we bring on that don't even have a copy of the contract that they've signed with the PPO companies. So they don't even really know what their requirements are and what the PPO's what their obligations are, what the payer's obligations are to them. And so reviewing those and understanding, again, how do you participate? Those are the first steps. And those two things in and of themselves will create massive value to the practice. So those steps are really worth every practice taking and doing, regardless of how in-depth they want to go then to try to improve, their positioning with these companies.
And I think you mentioned, certainly this can take time, right? So to be patient with the process moving forward, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's move on. There's the big hot topic, I think, across the entire industry is PPE. So do you see that PPO insurance carriers are addressing the increased costs as a result of the PPE? I know we've seen some varying things on this. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, well, I think that's the question, right? Is that everybody wants to know how do we address, how do we address it? And I think initially what we've seen is many of the PPO companies are addressing it with some sort of flat fee amount. We see some of the deltas doing like a $10 PPE fee, reimbursement fee. We've seen from $7 to $10, and arguably that's not going to be even remotely sufficient to cover the additional costs. In our opinion, and there's been a code D19999 is available from the ADA. That's kind of a mouthful to spit out. That's all the way all the procedure codes are. But that code can be used to be attached in a claim so that there can be a reimbursement provided. But again, standalone reimbursements like that probably don't effectively cover the overall cost. So what we're suggesting, that's why I think we're just very grateful to Henry Schein for scheduling this webinar series and providing this topic at a very timely point, I think, in the evolution of dental practices and the industry as we address PPE in this kind of new reality is that costs have substantially changed. And so as a result, we desperately need to readjust the compensation rates on a per procedure basis, because that will cover it. So if we understand that in totality, if our capacity in the practice has gone down, it means that the rent per procedure allocation has gone up, right? If we can see less and do less procedures, that means the rent we're paying on our facility is divided over less procedures. And so as a result of that, we need to be compensated at a higher rate per procedure. And so that's what we're really asking all providers to do, is to really evaluate their costs and then to really evaluate the contracts they currently have with the PPO companies. And again, I don't want to speak for them, but we have we think a very good and professional relationship with these companies. They understand that the dynamic has changed, and they're open to conversation about how, you know, this gap can be closed. They have been, at least, I think, a good partner in a good faith effort to at least throw out a flat rate PPE reimbursement. But it's really going to be incumbent on the providers, the business owners that understand all the real costs in providing the treatment, to come back to the PPO companies with kind of suggested increases to cover this rate. And I'm very optimistic, because we've done this for years and years and worked as a in-between between the PPO companies and the providers, that we can come to a very, you know, at least a suitable response and a suitable increase as a result of the changes that we're going to see, you know, moving forward as a result of, you know, this new kind of healthcare concern that patients are going to have about, you know, their own safety and going into a practice for their own health.
Yeah, thank you. And I think as we started the conversation and where we're at now, it's again reemphasizing there's no better time than probably now to take a really close look at what you're doing from an insurance standpoint. So really, really important. One final question. So you mentioned direct contracting. Is it better to participate through direct contact with an insurance company or through a shared network relationship?
You know, that's a question we get all the time, and which I'm sure that's why you're asking it, because it is one of those, when people start to dig into it and do these first steps, they run into that question, which is really goes back to this optimization question, like that, what is optimization and is it better? What's the best way for me to get access to these patients? Is it through the networks, the umbrella networks, or through direct contracting? And it's not as straightforward and as easy, you know, to answer. It really will depend on the situation. It's one of the reasons, not to kind of be a self-serving plug, but it's one of the reasons why companies, you know, like Unitas, that is representing hundreds and hundreds of practices and really does this all day long and understands and is engaged in conversations with the insurance companies on behalf of, you know, quite literally thousands of providers, that it's easier for us to kind of assess that question uniquely for that practice. And what I'm saying is it really will vary from practice to practice and from company to company. In some states and for some practices, it's going to be more advantageous for them to direct contract. In other states, because of what's transpired in the different leasing agreements, it might be much more advantageous for them to participate via another party. You know, to give you an example, if Aetna, say, and United Healthcare are partnered in a state to share panels, it might be much more advantageous for a doctor to be enrolled directly with United Healthcare, because it gives them access to those Aetna patients, as opposed to using Connection Dental or a network umbrella and see Aetna via that, you know, that relationship. And so that's one where probably getting some professional help and having somebody help you understand how you participate is going to be the best solution. Trying to dissect the web of agreements and networks is sort of overwhelming for the average dental staff, and especially when they really have so many other more important things that they need to be doing with their time and serving their patients, to spend hours and hours reading through agreements and trying to dissect how they could participate, you know, is probably not the best use a lot of practices' time, which is why, an outsourced, we like to think of ourselves as an extension of the office staff. When we bring a client on, we're going to work on representing that client and really understanding the unique needs of that practice. And for some, it might be as simple as they just need to direct contract with a certain number of companies. For others, it might be a more complicated participation strategy that needs to be implemented to get the right compensation rates.
Great. No, thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. That's really the last question that I had, but I really appreciate the insights that you provided. I hope that that everyone was able to take away some key tips or actions that you can take to directly help your practice, whether that be helping your staff with some decisions made from an insurance standpoint or making the decision to outsource. So again, thank you for your time in listening to this webinar today. And we hope you did find some things that were valuable. If you'd like to learn more, you can certainly contact us at Henry Schein Dental or go to pposolutions.com. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.